Welcome to the semifinals, everyone. Good evening, happy Monday night. It's Battle Superfluous. What are you drinking? Take a sip. That is a Rebel IPA. This gentleman here you all know as Gandalf the Giraffe. I am Paul Carganella, your host for the BS tournament. 8 teams have entered, 4 remain. Only one will emerge victorious and get their paws on one of these Battle Superfluous World Champion trophies. Look how awkwardly these guys are fighting each other off. I love it. Eat your heart out, Oscar. Tonight's battle pits the green team against the gray team. They will be debating the topic drawn a week ago, which is more iconic, the Beatles versus Frank Sinatra. Jill won the secret Facebook advantage for the green team, and they opted to support the argument that the Beatles are more iconic. So the gray team will be debating that Frank Sinatra is more iconic than the Beatles. The winner will move on to our final battle next month. And as always, our winner is determined by a best-of-3 verdict count. We have 2 guest judges sitting in with us this evening, and the third judge is still you, the viewer at home. Now, to go to facebook.com/BattleSuperfluous and cast your vote by commenting on the link to this video, either green or gray. And if our judges' decisions are split tonight, it will be the winner of the Facebook vote that decides who advances to the final battle. So that's how it all goes down. We will begin by introducing our judges for this battle number 5. We'll first say hello to Lisa Ensminger. Lisa is a professional actor. She is very smart. She graduated summa cum laude in, got a degree in French and English out there at East Carolina University. And Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. What are you drinking tonight?
Sparkling water. So cheers.
Hydrate that mind of yours. And can you tell our players, plain and simply, what will earn your vote this evening?
What will earn my vote this evening is confidence in your argument, plain out confidence.
Great. Thank you so much. Our other guest judge is John Carlos McMaster. John Carlos is a collectible critic. He makes really great video reviews of sci-fi and comic collectibles. You can find him on YouTube. Just search John Carlos McMaster. You'll find him. John Carlos, thank you for joining us. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking Pyramid Hef out of a Coors glass.
Excellent. I love it. Be a rebel. And can you tell our players what might earn your vote tonight?
I'm looking forward to some wit, but more than anything, I'm kind of hoping for some aggression.
Okay, those are our judges. And you met our players in the first 2 battles, but it never hurts to revisit and review. Our green team, Boot, is a musician, singer, songwriter, Dan Franklin. Our green team, Sword, is actor, writer, comedian, Stephen Young. The green hammer is professor of communications over there at Moorpark College, Jill McCall Wolcott. That's our green team. Our gray Boot is Danielle Argyros. She is an actor, writer, director, producer. The gray sword is Tyler Cole. He's an actor, writer, director, producer. And our gray hammer is also a professor of communications over there at Moorpark College. We have like a civil war of speech coaches tonight. I'm so excited for that. Our Wildcard lifeguard joining us again is the original I Am Groot, Danielle Grooters. And we've met our judges, and those are our players. Let's get down to... What was that, Gandalf? I couldn't... Oh, I almost forgot. Gandalf's offers. That's right. It's time for the Gandalfers. Oh, here's a little surprise twist for our semifinal battle tonight. You all know Gandalf as the cute and cuddly giraffe that hangs out and watches over battles. What you didn't know is he's also a deal shark. That's right. He likes to make deals, offers that'll change things up and really make life interesting. I love you, Gandalf. And he has actually drawn up a few offers. He would like to make one to a random player, and that random player is going to be Mr. Stephen Young. Stephen, you have been selected to hear one of Gandalf's offers without the counsel of your teammates.
Okay.
You're going to make a decision that could potentially change the course of this battle. Now, first, I am going to read you the names of the offers, and you'll select one to hear. This is not making a deal yet. You're not agreeing to anything. You're just going to pick which one you want to hear. They are called The Wild Sword Swing, Best of Threes Nuts, or Sorry Hammer, You Can't Touch This.
Oh, so many choices, but just on name alone, I'm going to have to choose Best of Threes Nuts.
Best of Threes Nuts. Here's how it reads. Best of three, that's nuts. Gandalf would like to offer you the opportunity to make this a best of 5 verdict battle. The Facebook vote would count as 2, and there would be an additional judge who has joined us before. He's watching from home.
Interesting. Best out of 3 is always good, but best out of 5 proves something. I'm going to stick with best out of 3. That's my gut.
Right. Gandalf's offer, the Gandalfer, has been shot down. But that means it's just time to start the battle. No twists, no turns. We're going to do this old-fashioned style. And we start with the kickoff round. That's the round in which the boots get 2.5 minutes to lay the groundwork for their team's argument. And we're going to start with the green boot, which is Dan Franklin. Dan, what's up? What are you drinking this week?
Well, I am the green team, so I'm drinking Green Flash IPA.
Excellent. All right, Dan has 2.5 minutes to tell us why the Beatles are more iconic than Frank Sinatra, and his time starts now.
Icons. Man, I mean, how really do you define, what makes somebody an icon? I mean, there's been so many, and I think in the case of a musician, what you've really got to do is you've got to go with what they create, the art that they create. And, being a songwriter and a producer and a singer myself, I think that writing is extremely important. So, yesterday I was trying to imagine all the people across the universe, here, there, everywhere, that the Beatles had impacted, and you can't do that. I mean, that kind of information, it's nowhere, man. I guess you just can't carry that weight. But do you want to know a secret? It won't be long until we all come together and see the truth through this glass onion. So, all together now, let's decide on this icon. Let's look at the writing. Just by the numbers, the Beatles, 212 songs written that they released. Frank Sinatra, 2 that maybe he co-wrote ever. He just didn't write. I mean, maybe he didn't have anything to say. Doesn't sound like much of an icon to me. I mean, and let's look at the most covered songs ever made. The top 10 most covered songs. 4 are Beatles songs of every artist ever. 1 is a John Lennon song, meaning 5 are really from Beatles people. That means half of all the most covered songs are by them. I mean, Yesterday alone has 3,000 covers, including Sinatra, who also covered a song called Something that he considered one of the best love songs ever written. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. I mean, let's look at music production. I mean, Frank Sinatra, sure, he's crooning, but he's doing what a lot of other guys did in the same way that a lot of other guys did it. When the Beatles came over, they brought George Martin production with them, and they completely changed the evolution of the sound. And not only that, but fashion. Whatever the Beatles wore, everybody wore. I mean, Beatles even have a haircut named after them, the mop top. I mean, it just seems to me that more influence happened from them, and to me, that's what an icon means. What did you do for humanity? How did you further the cause? And the Beatles have got it, hands down. Does Sinatra have an argument? You might think so, but I doobie don't.
Thank you, Dan. That brings us to the boot of the gray team, Danielle. And Danielle, I'm so glad you guys are back. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking water with 2 lemons, because that's my drink all the time.
Excellent. And Danielle has 2.5 minutes to tell us why Frank Sinatra is more iconic than the Beatles. Her time starts now.
Okay. I'm here to obviously explain to you why Frank Sinatra is the most iconic in comparison to the Beatles. I'm going to start off by defining iconic, a symbol of an entire style, time period, as well as reproducible as a product. Frank himself is iconic as the man, or as my mom likes to call him, Old Blue Eyes. Frank Sinatra. All right, the boy band musicians were nothing as 4 individuals, and yes, when they were together, they were something. But Frank is everything. A true one-man show, and I mean, okay, him as an individual made an iconic impact to the world as we know it. Okay, we remember, okay, Frank Sinatra is not just a musician. He was a conductor, a film producer, a director, and the list goes on. He also is an Oscar award-winning actor in his supporting role From Here to Eternity. And, okay, my favorite, he's an incredible dancer. You have to look at on YouTube, if you look up Gene Kelly and him, his dancing is flawless, as Beyonce would like to say. He also hit the Broadway scene with incredible performances, like in Guys and Dolls, which is one of my favorite musicals. And it's funny because initially he was signed with Columbia Records, then Capitol Records, then left Capitol Records to create his own record label, the Reprise Records, which till to this day is alive and well under the Warner Music Group here in Los Angeles, California. And he also founded the Rat Pack. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And he made Vegas what it is today. So this classic man has accomplished so much in his lifetime, it's insane, to be honest. I mean, there's so much that is Frank Sinatra. So let's face it, this man was an entertainer that will never fade. I mean, when looking up the definition of iconic, honestly, the only person I see is Frank Sinatra. So I know I have like 30 more seconds, so I mean, we could go on. Sinatra was also a recipient of 11 Grammy Awards, including the Grammy Trustee Award, Grammy Legend Award, and Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He was honored at the Kennedy Center of Honors in 1983 and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Ronald Reagan in 1985. I mean, this dude is the epitome of iconic. Enough said.
Thank you, Danielle. And that brings us to our sword round, where our swords for each team have 2 minutes to attack the other team's position. We'll start with the green sword. That is Stephen Young. Stephen, what are you drinking?
I am drinking out of an ice bucket, since that seems to be what all the kids are into.
Stop it. Just stop. All right, Stephen, you have 2 minutes to attack, and your time starts now.
Oh, well, the one thing I can say is, how iconic would Frank have been without the Mafia? Because that's how he was iconic. Without Nicky the Nose and Bruno the Ballbuster, or whatever they're called, he would not have done anything. I'm certain of that. Luckily, we did, because of him, get John F. Kennedy. I'll give him that. But other than that, he was known as the man. Yeah, like a madman, as in woman didn't matter or exist to the Rat Pack. They were objects. Really horrible. The Beatles sang about love. They wanted to share that with everyone. They wanted to experience all kinds of cultures. They went to India. They invented heavy metal with Helter Skelter. They invented pop music. The modern day radio era that's lasted for the last 70 years has the formats of Beatles length songs. That's why you have radio edits of songs, because they're Beatles length. I'll never forget the cover of my sister's album Rubber Soul. I thought, who are these guys with these massive beards and hair? That's the Beatles? Holy cow, I have to listen to this. Mind blown. So my basic thought is Sinatra wouldn't have been anything without the mob, and I personally think he broke a lot of kneecaps himself and while other guys held people down. He wouldn't have had an Oscar, I think, without any kind of mob influence. People were scared. They're like, we nominated him. We're going to have to give it to him. If we don't give it to him, somebody's going to string up Hugh Cronin.
Tyler, thank you for joining us. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking a V8 Splash. It's good. It's real healthy.
Excellent. And you have 2 minutes to attack the other team's position. Your time starts now.
Okay, so you say that Frank was nothing without the mob. Okay, and he did all these breaking of kneecaps, and he did all these influencing of judges and so forth and so on, but you don't have any hard evidence of that. You have speculation as told by other speculators as told by other speculators. When you can give me names and dates and places and itemized deductions and banking records, then I will go ahead and give you that the mob ties would have made him everything that he was today. But I don't see any of that in your argument, so I'm going to have to say that none of that makes any sense to me. Now, the Beatles were all about love, but they couldn't even stay together as one. So how much love can 4 of these guys really have if they couldn't have enough love for each other? They had to depart from themselves. The Beatles were, what, 2 years? I mean, here's the thing about the Beatles versus Frank Sinatra. And I forgot to pull up my sword, so I'm going to do that now. The Beatles are something that people like to dress up as and pretend to be on stage. And, you know, there's lots of impersonators for them. However, Frank Sinatra is a person that people want to be in life. I go ahead and call attention to this topper right here, which, while not, you know, invented by Frank Sinatra, still was made a little bit more popular. Even today, when people see that, they think 2 things: Indiana Jones and Frank Sinatra. And when you can put Indiana Jones and Frank Sinatra in the same exact categories, that's iconic to me. And that's more iconic than 4 guys who wore black suits, walked across streets, and took pictures, and one of them may have not have been alive and replaced by a complete stranger. So, iconic, I'm going to go with Frank Sinatra on that one. Back to you, Cotton.
Cotton.
I watched Dodgeball last night, so
Oh,
got a few quotes in my
great
repertoire.
reference.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's
All right, that brings us to our rebuttals, where the boot from each round gets 1 minute to respond to everything that's been said. We start with the boot for green. Dan Franklin, you've got 60 seconds. Go.
Well, first off, I'll raise your katana with my sigh. So here's what I got to say. First off, we're drinking V8 Splash and water with lemon. I'm drinking beer because I'm not worried about my position. You guys want to stay sober? All right. So we had a statement that nothing as individuals, you know, that these guys weren't individuals on their own. I'm just going to point out that McCartney wrote 32 number ones by himself, and I'm going to point out that Lennon wrote 26 number ones by himself. In fact, the Beatles had they've sold more records than anybody in the world by a vast long shot, 259.7 million to Frank's 27 million. I can't even make sense of those numbers. They are so vastly different. How many more human beings idolize the Beatles than Frank? I love Frank, don't get me wrong, but, you know, I love Tony too, and they're kind of the same guy. Anyway, back to you, sucker.
All right, I actually gave Dan a minute 10, so I'm going to do the same for Danielle here. Minute 10 starts now.
Okay, I don't know where you got those stats, because I'm pretty sure that Frank Sinatra sold 150 million records, but that's fine. But when it comes to you talking about how the Beatles branched off in individuals or whatever, we're talking about the Beatles. We're not talking about individuals. Frank Sinatra, as an individual, did all of these amazing things that I had given a list off before. And you guys are talking about music, which is great and great and great, but this man, Frank Sinatra himself, is the icon. When you're talking about the 1950s compared to the 70s, that is just so much time for media to actually become relevant and people to actually know who the Beatles are. There's the radio, there's the TV, there's all these amazing medias that Frank didn't have. And so you have to think about it as well. Like, that's also a huge deal. Are you giving me 10 more seconds? But for me, I still think that that Frank Sinatra is the most iconic out of the two.
All right, thank you very much. And that brings us to our hammer round. This is where we meet our members of the team with actual debate experience. And we start with the Green Hammer, who is Jill McCall Wolcott. And she's got 2 minutes. But first, Jill, thank you for reminding me. What are you drinking?
I am drinking Eve with, I think, something muddled in it because it's not quite clear anymore. Not sure what, but it tastes good.
Well, at least you're here with us, so if we need to call somebody, we will.
Okay, noted.
All right, your 2 minutes begins now.
Okay, so let's start with the definition of icon. One, to create, so writing music. Clearly, Frank Sinatra wasn't quite the icon when it came to writing his own music because he pretty much didn't do that. Second of all, most covered, when somebody is an icon, they are highly respected, but it says by definition a person or people who are very successful and admired. Nothing is more, I guess, an example of admiration than actually somebody covering your own music. So there's that. And then back down to the definition, fashion and music and movement. The Beatles really pressed forward not just a top hat or a cute little hat. They pushed forward an entire varied way of looking at fashion. Don't even get me started on fashion, but we'll go down this road for a second or two. Different varied fashion, everything from their hairstyle to their skinny little ties to that bohemian look that they pressed forward, and even obviously Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts, absolutely a style icon. Now, also to catch, it wasn't 2 years, it was 10 years of fantastic music. And I would say that, Danielle, you brought up the individuality of the Beatles, whether or not they were powerful as individuals. Clearly, they are Sir Paul McCartney, and all of them had success as individual songwriters. Now, speaking of moving beyond music, beyond fashion, beyond creation, let's take a look at what they did on the screen, because clearly Frank had some exposure in other areas. A Hard Day's Night was a fantastic movie and reached several, kind of accolades, and people respected the different style of movie. Also, Yellow Submarine, a freaking cartoon. Additionally, none of you have brought up things like board games that were created about Beatles. Let's see, board games. We have Beatles Scrabble, we have Beatles Monopoly, we have Beatles Trivial Pursuit, and something called Flip Your Wig, which sounds kind of naughty. I don't know what it's about. But the Beatles have clearly pressed beyond and above where a simple man like Frank Sinatra even tried to tap dance into.
Rolland, what are you drinking tonight?
Sadly, I'm at the office, so I've still got Diet Coke, but there's scotch waiting for me at home, because I do it my way.
Excellent. Your 2 minutes, Rolland, starts now.
Sadly for the Green Team, I could agree with everything that they said, and they would still lose the debate. Because icon is not just about writing, or the Mount Rushmore would not be iconic. As Danielle said, icon is something that symbolizes an entire era or style, and they have completely ignored this. And Stephen, you said that Frank was only an icon because of the mob. You grant that he was an icon in saying that. Now, as far as you talking about album sales over there, Dan, ABBA outsold the Beatles. And if you want to argue sales, then ABBA is more iconic than the Beatles. Mamma mia, that would be a tragedy. Okay? And they were together a whopping 10 years. Frank performed for 48 years. He was also more versatile. The Beatles have a star in the Walk of Fame. Frank has three separate stars for 3 separate things. He was an entire. And Vegas, his biography talks about the fact that had he not brought the Rat Pack to Vegas, there probably wouldn't be a Vegas today. You want to talk about influence? I love Vegas. I've made a lot of money there, and I never want to lose that. He was also influential in politics. He bridged the mafia and Kennedy. Kennedy was investigating the mafia, and if Frank was part of it, how could he possibly unify both? Jill, you bring up fashion. The Beatles were a fad. Frank is classic. The look that he had then is still classic today. You talk about influence. May 13 is Sinatra Day, as cleared by the U.S. Congress. He won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, 61 albums, 54 movies. Not only did he win 2 Oscars, he had 9 other nominations, 21 other Grammy nominations. In every way that you can imagine, Frank was emblematic of his era. It's not just
Thank you, Rolland. That brings us to our open forum. This is the round where everyone gets to chat about everything for about 3 minutes here. We're ready to go. Your open forum starts
Well,
now.
first off, Rolland, I just want to say that I don't know where you're getting your information, but ABBA did not outsell the Beatles. You can look anywhere. I'm looking at the record industry of America, so I mean that's just the people who actually know these numbers, not Wikipedia.
I'm looking at it right now. It puts them at 21 million.
Wikipedia doesn't count, Rolland.
60%, right. If you really did it your way, you wouldn't be drinking Diet Coke at work. You'd be doing Coke off a hooker's ass.
Oh!
Well, then I wouldn't have a job. But you know what? I sold the Beatles, but
he performed for 40 years and he had style. It was the same style for 40 years. He performed the same songs for 40 years.
Yeah, because it was classic. And if that's classic, they can do whatever they want for 40 years.
And politically, John Lennon, I think, had more impact on anyone else than Frank Sinatra did not impact the people, the youth of America, that have movements. People
really? How much do you love Vegas? How much do you love Vegas? There would be no Vegas without Frank.
Oh, come on. Bugsy Siegel created Vegas, not the Rat Pack, and you know
it. And
look at
and they say that Frank saved it by bringing people there. They didn't go for Bugsy. They went for Frank.
Whatever. He was window dressing.
The iconic building in America.
How many board games? How many board games does Frank Sinatra have?
Hi, John Carlos.
How many board games?
I can't even hear you over that droning in the background.
All I say is no Frank Sinatra travel.
I like that everyone thinks that
When you think
Monopoly.
rock and roll from the 60s, sure, you could think Beatles or the Stones. When you think rock and roll, you can think Elvis or Chuck Berry.
So what do you think?
Elvis and the Rolling Stones stole from black people.
There were so many other people that when you think rock and roll or the 60s, so many other things symbolized it.
Exactly. So they had to compete against more.
Nothing was
And what? And I'm not going to think about Mel Torme or Tony Bennett or Louis Prima or anybody else from that era that looks exactly like Frank.
Exactly.
Like Frank. There's your key word right there. They look like Frank.
No, but at the same time, it's the 1940s.
Nope, you said it. You said it.
I personally think that Frank looked like them.
Like Frank.
Era.
Everyone did.
When you think of that era, nobody thinks
from 1985.
Dude, there's a knock at my door right now, and there's a bunch of guys in black suits in a black car. Oh crap!
Frank didn't to combat racism with his friendship with Sammy Davis Jr. at that era of this country.
Not put it all on that. Okay. Entire movements of sit-ins to change policy, creating even today what we look at as the youth and how we take steps.
Right, and we know that pop culture representations of it matter.
Wow. My favorite part of that whole thing was just imagining Rolland on campus in his office screaming. Love it. It's time for our final hammer swings, where each hammer gets 60 seconds to make one last swing at it. And we go backwards with this one, so we're going to start with Rolland. Rolland has 60 seconds starting now.
Okay, let's talk about that cluster that just happened. When you think of the era of the 60s, the 10 years that the Beatles were together, so many other things are iconic to the 60s. You ask people today, they'll think of the hippies, the anti-war movement. As many people know about the Stones today as they do the Beatles. Beatles were not singular in implementing that era. Frank, you can bring up Mel Torme. Ask any 20-year-old who Mel Torme is, they'll have no idea. They still know who Frank is today. Frank was emblematic. And you're only talking about music. You're ignoring movies. You're ignoring directing. You're ignoring dancing. And politics and the Medal of Freedom that he won. All of those other things. What are the Beatles known for? How many people hated them for saying we're more popular than Jesus? Clearly, they were controversial, and then there are so much more that is emblematic about Frank Sinatra of his era, and he transcends for decades.
That brings us to Jill's final hammer round, and your 60 seconds starts now.
Okay, yes. In the 1960s, they had to move above and beyond because there was more going on musically in the 1960s. And even with everything going on, they stood out above and beyond. Second, the idea we didn't ignore movies. We brought up the Yellow Submarine. We brought up A Hard Day's Night. So they definitely moved outside of the genre of music. Also, politically, they had a lot of impact politically, not just, I would say, then at that time, but even now. A lot of the mindset that we have had to do with the movement that John Lennon really stood for. Also, you really did ignore as an entire the amount of music they created and what they changed in music. And let me just end with a word, Beatles mania. An entire movement of women and men that were infatuated by these people then and are infatuated now. They are iconic beyond belief. They've affected fashion, political stance, music, and affect musicians even today. So that's where I would like to end the argument.
Thank you, Jill. And so all of our players have had their say except one certain player, and that is our wild card. Daniel was here to make sure he could step in if anybody lost connection. But Daniel has 1 minute to say whatever he wants. Danny, start by doing a check with me real quick.
Yes, Roger.
There you are. All right. 60 seconds starts now.
All right. I just want to go on the record on the internets and say that I hate the Beatles and Frank Sinatra. I think their music is rubbish, and all of you guys are crazy. And stop playing that guitar, man, because it's really great in my skins. Secondly, what you guys should be thinking about after this is a real icon, which I would like to say would be Europe. The song Final Countdown makes my nipples itch, and that is how you can tell that it is one of the best icons ever. I want to leave you with a quick thing. The only thing I want to put chives on is my baked potato, and I'm not calming down. And I'll leave you with a quote because of these other people that are smart and go to college. In war, it doesn't matter who is right, just who is left.
Okay.
That's Winston Churchill.
That's amazing. Wow. I'm speechless yet again. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And that brings us to our judges' questions. And we're going to start with Lisa. Do you have a question for a player on either team?
I have a question for Dan. Dan, you mentioned that writing is super important. I just wanted you to elaborate on that as why writing your own music is so important for a musician.
Because it's the very essence of communication. It's that I've got something creative that I want to do. Essentially, if you don't write your own songs, what you're really doing is you're just painting someone else's picture. You know, and you could be a very, very good painter. I think Frank is a fantastic painter, but he's not painting his own stuff. The Beatles are creating new paintings that other people are looking at and then making their own paintings based on that. I mean, you talk to any songwriter today about who their influences are, bam, that's immediately where they go first. Everybody I know, Beatles, 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 Beatles. And record production. I mean, the things that were happening in those records have shaped the entire landscape of what we do. It was a giant leap forward in musical evolution, the likes we haven't seen since Bach.
Jill. So, like, it was brought up that the Beatles had a lot of fighting within themselves, but also wrote a lot of songs about love. concurrently, Sinatra and the Rat Pack totally got along and partied, but treated women kind of like objects.
True.
Can you expand on like how those two stereotypes might have furthered or hurt their iconness?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I would say that if you look at any really successful group of musicians, especially, but any successful group of people, there's going to be infighting. I mean, the Eagles, you know, if you look at Fleetwood Mac, I mean, you work together and you're creative, you have creative differences. So I think that the reason it probably didn't affect their iconic status would be because we can relate to that, and most people can understand in working with groups themselves that they have that kind of infighting. And, you know, it usually, I think, it refines the creative process. Womanizing, those types of things that the Rat Pack may have experienced or what might affect their iconic status, or for example, they brought up the mob and things like that and how that might kind of dirty the iconic status of somebody. That's not something a lot of people can relate to, and I think that's something that we see as an individual flaw or a vulnerability as an individual, so that could affect the iconic status.
I think the friendship is important because when you're looking at an icon, you're looking at what they stand for in terms of the way they are perceived publicly. In hindsight, we look at the fact that Frank was married 3 times. Absolutely, there is no question about that. But in terms of his era, he elevated women around him a great deal. For example, his daughter is known for the song "These Boots Are Made for Walking," which he co-produced with her. And I know we've talked a lot about writing, but even that kind of advancement is key. I mean, when you think about it, and I know writing got brought up, if you had to write your own stuff rather than just produce it, no actor could ever be an icon. No president could ever be an icon. They don't write their own stuff. It's the ideas that they put out there, whether they're writing, painting, or producing and helping other people to do that. And Frank supported, nurtured a number of artists. And if you look at the humanitarian award he won in the late 1980s, part of it was for his social work. So I think that later in his life, he showed the error of his ways and remedied that, and that makes it an even more important statement.
Thank you, Rolland. Thank you, judges. Thank you, players. Thank you, everyone, for that. Don't forget, at home, you have 1 week to vote on Facebook. Head over to facebook.com/BattleSuperfluous. Comment on the link to this video, green or gray, and we'll see in a week which of these teams will move on.